All right, welcome to this explainer. When we picture the criminal justice system, our brains immediately jump to those flashing police lights, dramatic courtrooms, and heavy iron prison doors. But look, if we really want to understand the system, we have to zoom right past the police and the courts. We need to ask the ultimate true crime question. Why do people actually commit crimes in the first place? And that is exactly what we are going to unpack today as we dive into Chapter 4, Explanations of Criminal Behavior.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our roadmap today covers 1. The big question, why? 2. Choice, biology, and psychology. 3. Society, strain, and neighborhoods. 4. Learning crime and losing control. 5. Labels, identity, and life course. And finally, 6. The exam answer formula.
Starting off with Section 1, the big question, why? The foundations of criminological theory.
It is absolutely crucial to establish right away that the theories we're about to cover aren't just random guesses. Actually, scratch that. They aren't guesses at all. They are rigorous scientific frameworks that are constantly tested by evidence to help us understand the fundamental drivers of human behavior. And to make sense of them, we have to look through two foundational lenses. On the micro side, we zero in on the individual. We're asking what makes one specific person different from another. But on the macro side, we zoom way out to look at the big picture, evaluating large social forces, things like deep poverty, failing schools, or entire neighborhoods. Every single theory we discuss today is going to fall into one of these two categories.
Moving right along to Section 2, Choice, Biology, and Psychology. We're going inside the mind of the offender.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we contrast the two oldest ways of thinking about crime. Let's start with that micro lens, zooming directly into the internal mechanisms of the mind. On one side, we have classical theory. This is the old-school idea that people have complete free will. They weigh the pros and cons, make a totally rational choice to commit a crime, and because of that, the only way to stop them is through deterrence, making the punishment swift, certain, and severe. But on the flip side is positivist theory. Positivism argues, well, it's not just a simple mathematical choice. Instead, it relies on science and data to show that biological, psychological, and social factors actually push people toward criminal behavior.
Digging a bit deeper into those internal drivers, early criminologists tried to explain crime purely through biology. You had Lombroso's vastly outdated idea of atavism, which basically suggested criminals were just evolutionary throwbacks. Today, obviously, we know it's a whole lot more complex. Take Freud, for example. He argued our minds are basically an intense psychological battleground. You've got the id, driving pure, selfish impulse. It's literally the part of you that wants to eat the entire chocolate cake right now, consequences be damned. The ego tries to make rational decisions in the real world, and the superego acts as your strict moral compass. If these get out of balance, criminal behavior might follow. Today, modern biosocial theory synthesizes all of this, arguing that crime is actually this complex, messy interaction between a person's biology, their psychology, and their environment.
Which brings us to Section 3, Society, Strain, and Neighborhoods. We are looking out at the street.
So now we're zooming out from the individual's mind to look at the broader environment, examining how a person's surroundings and their access to the American dream really impact their behavior. The crucial point of social disorganization theory is that sometimes the environment itself is the catalyst. It basically argues that place matters. If you're looking at a neighborhood struggling with deep poverty, constant resident turnover, and a total breakdown of community institutions like schools and family structures, crime's going to rise. It's not just a random collection of bad individuals, it's a disorganized environment producing highly predictable results.
Taking that idea of societal pressure even further, we get to Robert Merton's strain theory. Merton says society pushes all of us to want the exact same big goals: wealth, success, the newest smartphone, the whole American dream, but it absolutely does not give everyone equal legal means to get there, and that creates profound strain. People respond to this strain in 5 distinct ways. Conformists play by the rules. They accept the goals and the legal means. Innovators, they want the goals, but they reject the legal means, so they cheat the system, maybe by dealing drugs or committing fraud. Ritualists give up on the big goals entirely, but just go through the motions of the rules anyway. Retreatists just drop out, rejecting both the goals and the means, which we often see in severe addiction. And rebels, they reject the whole shebang and try to replace it with their own rules. It's an incredibly powerful framework for mapping human behavior.
Section 4, Learning Crime and Losing Control, the Influence of Others.
So how do the people we hang out with and our own levels of self-control shape where we end up? This brings us to differential association and social learning. These theories introduce a pretty radical idea. Nobody is born a criminal. Criminal behavior is entirely learned. We absorb it directly from the people closest to us, our friends, our family, our peers. Just like you learn to play a sport or speak a new language, you learn to commit crimes through observation, modeling, and seeing exactly what behaviors get rewarded or punished in your specific social circle.
But let's flip the narrative completely for a second. Social bond theory asks a totally different question. Why don't we all just commit crimes? What actually stops us when we see an easy opportunity to steal or cheat? Well, the theory argues that we're restrained by our bonds to conventional society. If you have strong attachments to your family, deep involvement in your school or your job, and a fundamental belief in the moral order, you simply have too much to lose. You are bonded to society.
Closely related to that is the general theory of crime. This one points to one single overarching factor: low self-control. People with low self-control are impulsive, they're massive risk takers, and they prioritize immediate gratification over long-term consequences. And where does that self-control come from? The theory argues it's almost entirely developed in early childhood, through consistent family and parental involvement. When that foundation is missing, the risk of criminal behavior literally skyrockets.
On to Section 5, Labels, Identity, and Life Course. This is all about society's reaction.
Now here is a fascinating twist. What if the justice system and society itself inadvertently create the very criminals they're trying to stop? And this brilliantly illustrates labeling theory, which argues that society's reaction to a mistake can actually be way more damaging than the mistake itself. If a teenager makes a bad choice, what the theory calls primary deviance, and the system aggressively labels them a delinquent, everyone starts treating them differently. Teachers, police, even their own families. Eventually, the teenager internalizes that label. They start to believe, well, if everyone already thinks I'm a criminal, I might as well act like one. This leads to secondary deviance, a tragic, self-fulfilling cycle caused entirely by societal stigmas.
Let's see how this builds over time with life course theory, which tracks how criminal behavior naturally changes as people age. Offending is very low in childhood, but in adolescence, the age crime curve spikes drastically. Hormones, peer pressure, and a lack of fully developed impulse control create a perfect storm. Then, as people move into adulthood, take on jobs, maybe start families, offending drops off rapidly. This natural, predictable decline is known as desistance.
It's also incredibly vital to acknowledge how modern criminology has evolved through feminist and intersectional theories. For decades, criminological theory was almost entirely focused on male offenders. These modern frameworks brilliantly address that massive blind spot. They examine vital intersectional factors like how trauma, systemic power dynamics, identity, and gender dictate not just who becomes an offender, but also who becomes a victim. It's a much more holistic, survivor-centered perspective.
Finally, Section 6, the exam answer formula, your ultimate cheat code.
Here is the practical payoff for your essay questions on Chapter 4. When you're tackling any of these theories, don't just list a bunch of facts. Try this 4-step structure. Step 1. Define the concept clearly. Step 2. Explain what it means in simple, everyday language. Step 3, and this is absolutely crucial, give a simple, original example. And Step 4, add a short evaluation of its strength or weakness. For instance, if you get asked about labeling theory, define it as society's reaction shaping behavior. Explain it by saying people live up to the labels they are given. Give an example of a teen labeled a delinquent at school who just gives up on studying. And evaluate it by noting it's great at explaining how punishment makes things worse, but a weakness is that it doesn't really explain why the teen acted out the very first time. Boom, full points.
I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. If so much of our scientific evidence shows that crime is heavily caused by macro environments, crushing neighborhood poverty, and social learning from broken support systems, why does our justice system almost exclusively punish the individual? It's a profound disconnect between criminological theory and actual justice system practices. Think about that as you continue to study. And thank you so much for exploring Chapter 4 with me on this explainer.